Please, if you're not comfortable with recording, please feel free to drop and watch on YouTube. Let me share my screen. Please do let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, it's up now.
Okay.
Can't see the screen.
All right. Good morning and welcome to Techstylers cohort 4.0. In the last 6 weeks, we've been learning about Microsoft Identity and Access Management under the Security Learning Pathway. My name is Joy Emedom, and I'm one of the Techstylers mentor. I'm a security consultant currently with one of the top Microsoft partners in Ireland, and I have done identity and access management for over 7 years, if not more. Once again, thank you very much to all those who have been consistent throughout our learning journey. We appreciate you. And if you're just watching us on YouTube, please feel free to join the Techstylers community. We're a community that is open to empowering. We initially started by focusing on women, but we're very open right now to our male allies to say they should join us. Our focus is to empower as much women or as much people we can in tech. And the security learning pathway was introduced last year for the first time. And so this is the second time we're having security in the cohort. So you are one of our top students, and we look forward to feedback from you. We look forward to you completing your project. So today is the last learning class. However, I have extended the meeting for 2 more Saturdays. Next week, we will look through the project together. I will send the project before the class so that you can start. However, next week we'll review it together as a team in case people need clarifications. And by the 27th, you would have expected to have submitted your project. Please, we would like you to, indicate your interest if you're okay with us showcasing the work you've done on any of our social media platforms. Once again, I want to, encourage you that digital identity is a career path that is on high demand now. And one of the reasons is very glaring. For every cyber attack that has happened, if you check it, there's always an entry point. And the entry point is through an identity and an access. So what does that tell you? That tells you that it's very important to understand the identity life cycle of any assets that you have in an organization. And that's why our last topic today is looking at identity governance strategy. Okay, so we'll quickly look at how to plan and implement entitlement management, how to manage your access review, your privilege access, and how to monitor your Azure Active Directory. Remember that when we started, we said there are different solution providers. However, we are learning Microsoft Azure Active Directory's own identity platform. So different organizations different solution providers have their identity and access management solution and process. However, the concept still remains the same. Zero trust methodology says you should verify explicitly, you should provide least privilege, and always assume breach. If you work with this methodology in identity and access management, it helps you to ensure that you have provided, the best practice standard for any organization. And that's why it's very important to include the identity life cycle and governance in the process. Okay, sorry. Are you seeing anything now?
Yes, I can see your screen.
What slide are you?
Governance and identity life cycle.
Okay. All right. It's actually okay. So I just want to briefly use this to explain. So what's governance? It's the process of where you oversee and manage the whole system. So I want to include governance in what I want to make sure that, oh, I understand how we, you know, provision and how we deprovision, how we grant access, how we grant privilege, what is happening. So the whole life cycle from the creation to deletion is around the process you build around that speaks to governance. We can see new faces today in our class. Welcome. All right. So what is entitlement management? The Microsoft Azure AD entitlement speaks around its own identity governance future, right? This entitlement management feature that is in the Azure AD is what allows you to be able to manage identities and their access lifecycle. And it helps you to automate from when people make requests to when you assign them this access and how you review, how you can expire certain of this access, because if you look at this, most times what happens is that if you remember when we talked about segregation of duties, how many times in organization you have departments just come and tell you, oh, we have 3 new staffs and they are all in HR. And the expectation is that you should put them in a group called HR. However, the question you should ask yourself as the identity and access manager is that group called HR, what are the assets that you have given that group? Because what that means is for everybody you put inside that group, they automatically have that access. So we learned, that groups are also identities. And so it's very important when we're creating groups, we understand what functions those groups are supposed to do. Because the moment you put in somebody there, that group automatically has assigned that person to a certain level of life access. So the entitlement management feature in AD allows us to be able to manage all these functionalities. We can see, access rights that have been given, review, and also configure automated expiration policies on this. So it helps you effectively manage your access to groups application, even your SharePoint site for internal users and also for users that are outside the organization, because we also saw how the Azure Active Directory allows us to create guest users that are not necessarily our staff. So maybe you have contractors, you have third-party people that work with you, and they have their own emails, but you want to be able to do some form of collaboration with them, right? So what do? You include them as guest users on your tenant so that you can allow them to probably share a file. So if you have a project, imagine doing a project, you are setting up, your organization is setting up a mobile application. The product team comes to you and say, we have Cheska Limited that is working with us, right? And they are going to create Power BI dashboards for our executives, right? We want to share documents with them. However, we don't want to share it, via email. We want to keep it on a shared repository that we have control into how people copy, assign. We want to also be able to collaborate. What you can do is they provide you a list of everybody in the organization, right? And then you can create them in your tenant as guest users. We saw that whole process, and during our labs we did that. Okay, now part of what the entitlement management system can help you to do is also manage all those assets that you have given and control who has what and manage who needs to be offboarded. So if somebody has left the organization, somebody has an asset and has not logged in for the last 90 days, the question should be, it means that person probably is no more in that organization, or that person probably is no more in that team, or probably does not need that function. So those kind of idle assets should be retrieved, and the entitlement management is what helps you to efficiently, manage these assets that you have given to groups or to applications. So why use entitlement management? Organizations often face these challenges when they are managing employee access to resources. You would see that users may not know what access they should have. I just give an example. HR will say, oh, we have 3 new staffs, they're in HR, and then you just add them to a group that you've called HR. And even when users know, most times they have difficulty in saying who should do what or who should approve. So it's also very important that you from time to time review access that you have been given. And sometimes once you've given users certain access and they know they have it, they start to abuse it or they start to overuse it, right? So that's why it's important to know, is this necessary for this person's functions, right? Any questions so far? So, like we said, why is it important, right? So users may not know what access they need or how to get it. That's the truth. A user might come and say, I'm in HR and I need access to the HR SharePoint site. And when you go, you find out that the HR has 6 different SharePoint sites. They have for payroll, they have for learning and development, they have for entitlement and benefits, they have for contracts and contracts and agreements, they have for onboarding. What do you do? Just because he said I'm in HR. So most times when you tell them to raise service desk, you just see the issue is unable to access HR site, and you, the identity and access, you just go and then grant at the root. Meanwhile, the person is in payroll. So apparently what the person needs is access to payroll site, not necessarily the whole root of HR, because maybe the moment you do the root of HR, depending on how that site has been created, the person automatically has access to if you did not disable inheritance and stuff like that. So a user does not need to know all these details. That's the truth. It's your job as an identity and access management. It's not to just be we call it baggage in, baggage out. Especially when you are doing identity and access management with security function. So in some organizations, you will see split access. People who will probably be doing identity, we call them user access management. They just focus on that. But once you are an identity and access security person, your role is to always ensure that the identity and access that have been granted are done with security controls in place. So when you see those kind of things, you do not just say, oh, the person should be granted. And that's why, we use the entitled management, because it's what helps us to be able to, manage these processes. Users to keep right. So you gave me all the rights into HR. Meanwhile, my job function is strictly around payroll management. What you have done is that you have elevated my credentials and I'm doing payroll. So if peradventure there's a compromise on my account, right? And the person who is targeting our company is looking for how to get access to our contracts and employee details, just to be able to get personal information that they can use because of staff employee records. There are staffs who probably have health issues that need to be confidential, but HR keeps all those records. Now, because my account has been compromised in payroll, and the target from the hacker is not to get people's pay system to know how much they're paying me, but more to be around data and personal information about people that once they publish in the dark web will become detrimental to organizations, and not necessarily to tell people that in your organization they are paying people XYZ. What you will find is that they would explorate those data and we will not know, because you won't even know, because you don't even use it. So you will not even be able to say, oh, I'm noticing something different, because you don't even use that right. So you have held on to an access longer than you need it, or that you don't even need it because you were giving that access just blindly. So the governance process is what helps us to track situations that we have found, like, because the truth is, in reality, we will find ourselves in such situations. So when you're doing, governance in entitlement management, you'll be familiar with terminologies like resource. And so in Microsoft solution is speaking around a resource can be an asset. A resource rather is an asset, and an asset is a group. I told you, a user account, a security group, an application, a SharePoint site, a role that a user can be granted to. All of these things are assets. Policy are the rules that you now define that help you to determine the life cycle. So how will users get access once they join? I told you that as you begin to practice this in real life situation, imagine you had 10,000 users. So during your lab, you were told to create one user, assign the user to a group. So it was easy for you to do it one. Imagine the people who need to do this for 200 staffs. So a company, is doing their velocity undergraduate program and they are onboarding 100 staff. You saw how it took you to the steps you had to take to create one user. Ideally, do you think that's what they would do 100 times? Then that's the only work that person will do that day, or maybe in that whole week. So there are automated ways to do these things, right? And so the policy helps to now control how somebody has been created. So when we're using the entitlement management, it also helps us to be able to review and say, when people are created and onboarded, they should get XYZ baseline groups. And when they get this kind of baseline groups, this is what the only kind of access that they should have. Every other access should now be maybe through an approval process, or through cyber ops check and XYZ. And then you can now create access bundles that you use to enforce this policy. So we call it access packages, right? The access packages is what you put in your catalogs, right? These access packages help you to be able to understand users' requests, right? As they make this request. Catalogs are referred to as a container where you have put resources. So a catalog is, I have a resource. A source is a group, and I have this package that has been assigned to this resource, and so I put them in a catalog, right? And so these are some of the terminologies that are unique to the Microsoft Entitlement Management feature. Any questions so far? So an access package, what's an access package? And what can I manage with an access package? So an access package is simply a bundle of resources, like I've explained. And we have already looked at what resources. The resources can be a user that needs to work. Resources can be a group, can be an application. So an access package is when you put different type of resources, right, that you need. So if a user needs to work on a project or needs to perform a task, those group of users can be grouped into an they are now a resource, and they can be put into an access package. And access packages have policies assigned to them. So that way you see, once a user is inside this access package, XYZ policy applies. So what can you do with access packages? You can use it to assign membership. Again, like I said, you don't have to, you can say, oh, once somebody has been created, create an access package for onboarding, so that once somebody has been onboarded, automatically the person enters into all staff. There are times where you see in organizations, the MD or the board or HR wants to send a communication to all staff. How do you think they're able to send that message and everybody? Do they start typing the email address of 10,000 staff? No. So it means that there's a group that is created, probably called all staff, all users. Some organizations can funkierize it, blue team, purple bed, whatever their organization slogan is. But that group signifies everybody in the organization there. So you can use an access package to manage such kind of group memberships, right? Whether they are AD security groups, whether they are Microsoft 365 security groups. You can also use access package to manage teams. Remember, when you create Microsoft 365 groups, most times you have created a teams for them. So you can use access package to manage those things. You can use it to also manage how you assign applications to how you assign applications, especially software as a service applications or custom applications. You can also use access package to also manage SharePoint membership. Another thing you can use access package to do is to control access to other resources that rely on the Azure AD group. So things like licenses. So again, I explained to you that your organization can even have different type of licenses based on users. I've been in scenarios where we have E5, we have F1, we have, depending on different use cases. Now, what does that mean? A typical HR person does not know that you have different types of licenses because they don't understand. But in IT and identity access management, IT number one, maybe the people in charge of licensing want to manage costs, and they have sat down with Microsoft to say, give us different type of licensing, because we've looked at our business case. We have users who don't need all the functionalities of Microsoft, right? They only need XY. So you have in your tenant 3 or 4 types of licensing type. HR will give you a list and say, create this user. This user is a contractor. So in that, your identity and access management governance policy, you would have created a grid that says that a contractor should be added to this baseline group and should be given this license. A core staff should be added to this baseline group and should be given this access. Your access package can now help you to implement those kind of policies that have been defined in your policy. So the access management, which is a function in the entitlement feature, allows you to now effect those policies, and that's how you enforce governance in your environment. Why should I use access package? I'm sure at this point you're already nodding to yourself that you know why. One of the things is it helps you to manage time, you know, it helps approvals. So you don't have to manually say, oh, what to create, this thing should go. When you're creating access package, you can put the approval part on the access package. So as soon as I use this access package to activate XYZ action that has been configured there, if it requires approval, it goes to the approving people that I have configured there already. So we don't have to be saying, so in some of the things where maybe people send that you say, go and get your line manager's approval, go and get this. There are ways we can create access packages that can allow us, even once we initiate that process, it will go to whoever needs to approve. Once the person approves, it automatically comes and completes that process for us. So it also helps manage access without IT. So again, remember, it is a function under the entitlement. So once you have been able to define what the policy says, when you are creating access package, it's helping IT to say, we don't have to come all the time to do this. Once we click this and select a particular access package, it will do every other thing for us. So it doesn't have to, we don't have to go to our manager and say, sir, approve that request. It automatically sends it. The person sees it in their mailbox, approve. It comes back and completes the task. It also helps you manage cross-organization collaboration. So if you look at this, this helps you to automate and manage your governance process when it comes to identity. However, access packages do not replace other types of mechanisms for access assignment. They are just appropriate for situations when employee need time limited access for a particular task. For example, you might use group-based licensing and a dynamic group to ensure employee have a particular type of license. Again, I explained that when you have different licensing methods, you don't want to always be clicking. So you create an access package that says, when it's contractor, this is what it is. So they only get XYZ license. When you require packages that require approval, right? Or when two or more organizations are collaborating. So there are instances where access packages might not provide what you want. However, we are focusing more on the value we can get. Some of those are our routine tasks and activities that the access package can help us to achieve so that we can be able to implement governance around our identity management. So in summary here, this thing is looking a bit small. I don't know how to make it bigger. So in access package, so let me get my pointer. So if you look at here, this is a catalog. Okay. Sorry, the whole of here is the catalog. And in the catalog, we have applied two types of, we've had access package 1, access package 2. And in this catalog, we have resources. In this resources, we've put a group called group 1. You can call it group HR. Group 2, you can call it group procurement, whatever. We have app 1. App 1 could be, HR application, site 2, whatever. So we've grouped, resources. So for instance, an ERP application that is used by HR, used by procurement. So group 1 could be HR procurement, the app could be the ERP, and the site could just be a site that you have created for the application to go and maybe store data that people upload. So now you now create like two types of access package to this resource, right? Your access package 1 is saying that there's only one single group, which is group 2. And then you have defined a policy that enables a set of users in the directory to request access to that package. And your access package 2 includes a group, includes application, includes site. So in this follow me again, look at how we're breaking it down. In this catalog, we created the resources, and in this resources, we've put like products. This is where your role comes in as an identity, where you need to understand what are the similar. So I found out that People in HR use ERP application and people in procurement use ERP application, even though they have different functions, but they all use the same application. So we can group that as similar resources and then put them under resources. However, when people need to assess, we have grouped that, okay, when people in HR, which is group 2, need access, we want them the process to go through a different route. And when people in procurement need access, we want it to go through a different route. So we can call maybe group 2 procurement, group 1 HR. And so you can see that there are two different access packages. And from here, these are the different requesters. So you can see requester 1 and 2 are requesting for access through the access package to group 2. Requester 3 is requesting for access package to group 2. Now, to access package 2, what have we done? We've put a policy on access package 2. We didn't put any policy on access package 1. We put a policy on access package. Why? Because we want it to require approval. So we have said that once people request here, it should go through an approval, right? And once it creates an approval, once it goes through an approval, then it creates them under the external directory. So the point here is always understand the use cases in your environment. The identity and access management is not just to grant access, which is what people do today. Oh, give me access, and just go click. Oh, you have access. Every time there's a breach, over time, as we study and analyze and do forensic on attacks, what we have seen is that it is exploited accounts with idle privileges that has allowed an exploiter to be able to gain certain level of access into the organization. So what the governance side of identity is saying is that because we know it can be mundane coming to do these things one by one, the function or where you can benefit from enforcing governance in your environment is by automating certain of the processes, and you can automate it using what Microsoft calls the entitlement package. However, you need to sit down and do a bit of work. You need to sit down and understand the process. But what Microsoft is saying to you here is that it's possible to be able to automate these things so that you don't have to stress yourself always going back to review. You can use the catalog, resource, access package, and access policy process to fine-tune your governance. You will see a question like this in your project. Any questions so far? All right. So as we saw in that diagram, right, a catalog is the main container. If you come back here for those, just a quick flash so we can keep it. This is where the catalog is. So everything inside is a catalog, a resource is inside a catalog, an access package is inside a catalog, right? Everything is inside a catalog. So a catalog is the container of resources and access package. So you create a catalog when you want to group related resources and access package. That, like I said, you have found out that there's a common factor between these departments. These departments use the same type of applications, even though they will have different access rights on their profile, but they use the same kind of applications. So anytime people request for access to this application, I want the process to be automated, right? So you can use catalogs to be able to group related resources. Another good thing with catalog, and one keynote is that whoever creates a catalog is the owner of that catalog, right? And then the thing is, you can add additional people to own catalogs. This just shows us the way to create a catalog. Easy steps that we can see when we move to our labs, right? Again, how do you add resources to your catalog? Simple, easy steps. You follow the steps. It's very easy. However, I always tell people that the good thing about technology is that if you if you do your run book well, somebody who has never even seen Azure Active Directory can implement a task because it's click click. The work in identity and access management is in understanding how to decipher that whole process. That's why, if you notice in the class, I like to use Titi's work experience as an example. Titi, over the years, has implemented CCTV for different kind of organizations, small, big, large companies. However, we found out that from her, all she does, she has never really paid attention to identity. What they do is they install it. When they are done, it's in the MVR showing who are we handing over to. They train maybe the CSO team and these people, and then they hand over. Most of the times, what you find out in those kind of situations is that everybody has access. The highest you will find is maybe they have two types of access. They have an admin and then they have an account for maybe the security control room. No segregation of duty has been done. Um, in large organizations, like for instance in the bank, CCTV is not only owned by the security team. You have the audit team require access to the CCTV footage. You require IT have access to the location because they need to manage backup and storage. You will have the CSO have access. You will have in some instances the compliance manager and compliance of the organization require access. Okay, you in some instances you have corporate services. So the question is, do you give everybody the same access? Most of the times when we do audits, that's what we see. Everybody has, because the request that they always send is, I need access to CCTV. Nobody's asking what kind of access do you need. An auditor just wants to view footages. An auditor wants to view where are footages logged, who has access to where footages are logged. A CSO wants to see live stream, wants to see all the camera views. A security officer on duty also wants to see live, but a security officer is not interested in footages depending on his level. A security supervisor might be interested in stored footages, but a security officer on duty does not, because the officer on duty's job is to monitor real life. A security supervisor, yes, can come back and say, I want to see what my guys on night duty did. And so he might want to go to where footages are stored. So if you don't understand this breakdown, you keep finding yourself giving everybody the same thing. So when you're creating catalog, you also need to define and say, okay, this catalog is for marketing. And like the example we gave, that catalog was for HR and procurement. And these are the resources I want to put inside there. You see this analysis, it has nothing to do with the solution. The solution is just telling you that you can do it. You need to sit down and do this. We call it design and planning. So that's how you mature and grow your career. You might be an implementer when you start, but as you expand in your career, that's where they call us security consultants, because most times we're not even implementing. We sit down to do design and planning. When you sit down and say, how do you function in your organization? What are the things that you do? Who needs to see this? I've been to an organization where there was a fraud, and the chairman of the company, as far as he was concerned, he stopped putting CCTV. And when you ask him, he say, what's the use? They always rob us every time. And every time they rob us, the CCTV does not add value. So let me just make up my mind that they are going to keep robbing me. And I'll keep spending money in police to arrest one or two staffs that I'm suspecting or that people suspect, or arrest the security team. And when the case is dragging, when I'm tired, I relieve. That kind of person, technology has failed him. And when we now dig further, what did we see the problem was? Two things. Yes, the CCTV was configured, but there was no process around how CCTV will be managed. There was no process around who has access to what. So in one of the instances where the CCTV actually saw somebody come into the office, one of the front cameras, the CCTV saw the person in the office stealing. The front camera did not capture the person coming in because somebody had gone to turn off the front camera. But probably the person didn't pay attention to one of the cameras that actually saw. In that instance, you can't get through because what was showing, the account was everybody was using admin. So yes, in my level of experience in forensic, we can go deep down to be able to trace. So we did a bit of saying who are people that were on duty, but we will not, in those kind of situation, you cannot be able to actively pinpoint who did that now, because what you have done is you have given everybody admin access. So we could pinpoint to say, okay, this happened between The logs is showing it happened between 3 and 5 on Tuesday. Who are those who are on duty? You have 5 security officers. So what happened was that they arrested 5 people. In fairness, is it the 5 people who committed that fraud? No. So what has failed? It's not that the people have failed in their duty. The system has failed. The identity and access security people have failed, because there was never a time they should have given all the security officers admin one, and also giving them the ability to be able to turn off cameras. As a security control officer, your job is just to monitor footages, monitor live streams. You have nothing to. So understanding processes is very key in identity and access management, and especially when you want to start implementing governance. Because that's what the solution will allow you to do. But if you don't know what you want to do, then you will not be able to utilize these functions in this solution. So there are several ways that you can configure the entitlement management for your organization. However, if you're just getting started, it's important that you understand common scenarios for administrator catalog owners. Again, if you remember how we started the course, we looked at roles. So the instance where I gave you that there's an application administrator, default Azure roles. And I said, best practice, don't use default roles to assign to people, because application is application. HR application is application. Core banking application is application. CCTV application is application. So if you say, oh, I want to start implementing roles, and anytime they say, oh, please give this person rights to be able to do XYZ on the application, the person is the application administrator, you go and put, what you find out that if you open application administrator role, Joy is there, but she's for HR. Titi is there, she's for network. Franca is there, she's for Power BI. So what will happen is that I can also access CCTV. Franca can also access HR, because we're all in application. So if you recall, we learned how to create custom roles so that we can assign them to the specific applications that people need to. It's the same thing with the entitlement management. Do not automatically say everybody needs to have this. You must be able to delegate. So there must be somebody who is an administrator, and that person has the super rights to be able to delegate. There's somebody who is the catalog creator, the people that can create catalogs. Again, apply that same principle and concept of segregation of duty also in the entitlement and governance management. Do not just say, oh, everybody needs to be able to do governance. No, even in teams that do governance, they have people that need to do certain things, right? So in your lab, again, you have the opportunity to be able to practice how to create catalogs and assign assets. We'll quickly run through this. We keep emphasizing the importance of how to use terms of use, terms of entitlement, privacy policy. We did this when we were creating users, and this is just because of GDPR policy. So it's saying that you can also implement the same thing here. You can point people to where terms of use is, to where the terms of entitlement is. The solution is saying that, because based on company policy too, it will say that anytime anybody is using a certain application, remind them that this is a corporate environment and that what they are doing ABCD is being recorded in some instance, or this is what you have enforced as compliant policy. So again, when you're using the entitlement management, you have the ability to create terms of use, which you would see how to do in your lab. Now, we looked at how Microsoft has allowed us to introduce external users into our identity. Some organizations will tell you blatant no, they don't want it. However, as innovation is evolving, right? I give an instance, you want to collaborate on a project, you want to improve on operations. Microsoft has given you this ability to be able to introduce external users into your organizations. And when we say external users, is by creating them using their own credentials so that they can collaborate with your people, right? So you also want to manage this life cycle. You don't just want to leave this open-ended, because remember, you're not the owner of their identity. Their identity is on their own environment, but because of B2B B2C, you are able to introduce these external users into your identity management. So you also want to build governance around this. You also want to know, when I give a guest user who is an external person access to a site, I want to know if the person can move files. I want to know what exactly the person can do. So the entitlement management would allow you to be able to know what an external user, is doing, and you can who even invited the external user into the environment, who is requesting for the external user. I've seen a scenario where HMO team, the partnership they had with the HMO companies, they used to do like this quarterly health awareness, and they used to do live stream, right? So it was the initiative of the company's own HR team that was managing HMO. They felt like, oh, our staffs are always getting overwhelmed. We want to be able to help them become aware of their health, manage their health. So they partnered with their HMO. They have different HMO, but one of their HMO was happy to always come and talk about the health related topics. So they wanted to stream it because it's their initiative. But now the HMO company was a third party, right? So in these instances, every quarter they will send a request based on who is supposed to be the presenter, so that you can create that person, give the person access to the live stream, configure the live stream, and then they'll be able to, once they set up their live stream at the back, they can now give, because that person is now on the tenant, they can see that person and say, okay, this person should be able to present, this person should be able to mute people, XYZ. In those kind of instances, you can see that that thing is done every quarter. But once that third party person has been created on the identity, that person stays there, right? With that rights. So your governance is what helps you to say, every 30 days, we want to purge external users, or we want to purge external users who we have put in HR external user group, because we know that HR does this every quarter. So it means that for every 90 days, this account will be idle, and we don't, if they're not going to use it, we want to purge it out. But if you don't understand, when HR was sending that request, you only just, can you do this? Yes. You don't sit and say, oh, what do you people want to do? What are you trying to achieve? How frequently would this be? That will help you design the right approach to use. Is this making some sense, guys?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Because in one of the things I've seen over my career is when people say, oh, I want to go into tech, they're more excited about just learning how to click, how to configure. And that's good. In things like coding, it's okay. You want to learn how to create the app. Even in things like Power BI, you want to learn how to create tables, you want to learn how to create the dashboards. They are, for me, they seem like, oh, once you understand it, then you can. But in things around security, it takes a lot around design and planning, because anybody can go into the platform and create a user. Anybody can go into the platform and create an external user. But that action is what has exposed the company. So this, as a security person, your job is to understand why things are done the way they are, so that you can now put the right security controls in place. And that's how you top up your career and your experience. And when you sit among your peers, you distinguish yourself. So you're not just saying, oh, I know how to configure Active Directory and create users, I know how to assign groups. No, you're talking about the whole end-to-end life cycle of an identity. You're understanding, somebody puts you in a team and say, we want to produce an application. You're not just speaking to, oh, users have to be able to log in. When users log in, what would happen? Where would they go to? Where will their accounts be stored? What do they need to see? How long do we need to leave this user? You begin to ask those questions, and those questions will inform how you would design the identity life cycle of a user. The solution and the technology is already telling you can do this. So you need to now build how to, do this. So when we say connected organization, we're referring to an organization that you have a relationship with, in order for users in that organization to be able to access your resources. Again, I think this is speaking to things like I think the word's coming to my head. Is it If somebody can remind me, I think it's speaking to things like federation. Jesus, where's it going? I'll remember the word. There's something we call it federation, or yeah, I think it's tenant federation. So you have the ability to be able to
Is it integrated?
No, it's something around federation, but I don't want you to get confused around the federation we talked about when we said you have your on-prem infrastructure and you're trying to federate it to Azure Active Directory. I think it's federation too, but I remember the word. There's a word before it where you connect to another organization. So what happens is that organization can be chatting with you directly, right? Because you are federated with them, right? They'll be able to chat with you on your Teams. They'll be able to chat with you like as if they're on your tenant, but they are not, because you've done federation, right? So again, entitlement management will help you to be able to specify that users are connected not from your own environment, but they're connected from the cloud. That's another thing entitlement helps you to achieve. Okay, let's look at this scenario. For example, suppose you work at Woodgrove Bank and you want to collaborate with two external organizations. These two organizations have different configurations. Graphic Design Institute uses Azure AD, and their users have a user principal name that ends with graphicdesigninstitute.com. Contoso does not yet use Azure AD, so Contoso's users have a user principal that ends with contoso.com. So let's look at how we would achieve this. So we can create an access. What it's saying here is that you can create in this case, you can create one connected organization for the Graphic Design Institute and one for Contoso. If you then add the two connected organizations to a policy, users from each organization with the user principal name that matches the policy can request access package. So what you can do is you can now create an access package, right, and put a policy for that says internal users and external users. And in your external users, you can say external users that are not in your directory, Graphic Design Institute. Now, because the graphic design users are using the Azure AD, it will make the integration much easier because you can go on that domain, and there's something under. I don't want to make it too abstract for us because most of us are beginners. There's something under the Azure AD that we can call verified domains when we are doing this. The name is not coming to my head. When we're doing this kind of tenant federation, so you can say, okay, this domain, I have verified them. What you're saying is that I want to be able to exchange things with this domain. Don't bother going through the external routes and doing verification domain. Go through. So if an organization is using Microsoft 365 Azure AD, and you are in partnership with that organization, doing business with that organization, you can create this form of federation whereby you have added them as a verified domain. What that does is that Microsoft doesn't have to now take that request out of his tenant. This is now network architecture I'm explaining, and then route the request inward. Because you are sitting in Microsoft tenant and I'm sitting in Microsoft tenant, which me and you are not seeing from a front user perspective. What Microsoft is saying is that you can be able to collaborate and talk with each other. So we can create access package that says that once the person is in a verified domain, go through this approval, because already if I say I've verified a domain, it means that there's already a certain level of trust between our organization and that organization. However, for Contoso that they don't have the Azure AD and I have not verified their domain, I can put another policy that now says maybe they should do two-factor authentication because I don't know, I can't verify who their domain is. Should I take that again? Okay, I'll run it again. So if you look at this explanation here, you are work group bank, you're like the main company now, but you are partnering with graphic design and Contoso. However, graphic design uses Microsoft solution. So in connected organization, we have what I can go and say, because graphic design, they're using Azure, Microsoft, it means that I can trust the foundation of their tenant. So I'm going to add them as a verified domain. When I add them as a verified domain, what that means is that there are certain checks I will not do because I know that they're already a verified domain. You know that people can buy any kind of domain over the internet. So when people are doing phishing emails, they go and buy domains, right, that almost look like your domain. So in order to not even allow your users become confused, because when people are sending spam mails, okay, what they do is, if for instance my domain is cheska.com, if I want to fish people in cheska.com company, I can go and buy Cheka. So Cheska is CHESCAA.com. I can go and buy CHECA.com. You know that it would take an extra look for you to see the difference, that there's no S. So when we, maybe in another cohort, we will do email security as one of our security learning parts. We'll show you how, when people create these phishing campaigns, that's why most times staffs fall for it, because the domain almost seems similar. When you just look at the flash of it, you don't necessarily see that there's a letter missing or there's an additional letter. In the early days when GTB started, for those in Nigeria who are watching from Nigeria, when the GTB bank started the internet banking newly, they were one of the first people. That's how they were phishing their customers. They would go and create the landing page with the internet banking, but they would do GTBNK, or they would do GTBANNK. So it would take an extra look for you to actually even see that that's not the domain, because you are more about the user landing page, and anybody can clone a landing page. So once you put your username and password, it will now, of course, throw an error. And when it throws an error, that's when you actually go to your browser to want to actually type the right domain, because you know it, and it will now take you to the right page. And then when you put your username, it goes. So that first time, you just assume maybe I had a network fluke, not knowing that somebody has already copied out your username and password. So if we bring it back to identity access, it's saying that in order to fine-tune your processes, if you have a business partner that you're already establishing a relationship with and you can verify that, you can add them under verified domain. So in the access package, you have a policy that says if this person is as long as if the person is not in the verified domain, then we want to add another policy that says, oh, do email authentication, do OTP, because we can't verify this other partner's domain. We can only verify this other partner's domain. It's just calling out some of the improved operational processes that you can do with the entitlement package. Again, this takes us through the step-by-step, which you will see in your lab. Now, because we are saying, oh, entitlement package is supposed to help us to do identity governance, right? It doesn't now mean that on entitlement package itself, we should not apply governance, right? So again, following the rules of zero trust, you also should be reviewing your entitlement management feature to find out who are those, that have these entitlement packages. And it's important that you review it, because you can see the level of automation that you can do once you have those rights. Any questions? One of the greatest challenge that organizations have today, I can tell you for free, is access review. People struggle with doing this part of governance. And what I say to people is, if you did not start up right, that's why you struggle. So that's why it's very important, if you're going to work for a small organization, start now to help to imbibe that culture. if you're not yet fully in the identity space, but you are providing a service like a Titi who is into CCTV and networking, right? She can begin to incorporate this whole process of identity and access management, how it should be done, as part of her service. And I told her how easy peasy it would justify her implementation cost versus when she says, oh, I want to install camera. You see them, that's why they will charge you rubbish. They'll price you rubbish because they're like, I can get the average technician in Otigba to come and install my CCTV. Why are you telling me you need X amount? By the time you introduce the value you're bringing from an identity perspective and showing them segregation of duties, putting in the chart, the plan, it beefs up what you're doing, and showing, they're now including how they can do this access review quarterly and biannually. Now, in large organizations, things like access review should be driven from the business policy side. I did a presentation on Thursday for women in tech, and I was talking to people how to break into security. And I said, most time when people say they want to do security, everybody thinks that they have to be the ones who needs to configure. You can be somebody who is good at creating policies. Maybe your background is a lawyer, or your background is around policy management. You study that. Your type of people will be very good in organizations, but you want to break into tech. Once you understand these things, you will help create policies that help organizations, because if there's no policy, then organizations will not see the need to do access review. Access review is driven most times by the policy that the organization has. And what is access review? Is what helps you to ensure that the right people have the right access to the right resources. So when people say, remember, all of these things that we're doing originates from when we do forensic analysis and we find out how organizations have been compromised. 99.9% is always around assets that are not needed. Because an outsider doesn't necessarily know if you are the global admin of your organization. I don't know if you're going. So when hackers are doing social engineering, right, they can see people's profiles. So for instance, oh, a CFO. So they are targeting a CFO. But most times, a CFO, if you check, might not necessarily be the one who needs to initiate the transaction, but he needs to send the email to his colleague to approve, right? For his colleague to go into the platform to make that payment or that invoice. So that's why you will see them target a CFO, because they know, oh, a CFO has the power to do this. So it's the same thing. Every hacker is looking for who has the highest right. So if when they come in, they look for domain admin, they just find out, oh, this person has super rights. That's who they focus on. They leave every other person. Take that super rights and begin to do what they need to do. So access review is what helps you to make sure that the right people have the right access to the right resources. And like I've said, this review is what now helps you to mitigate against risk, because now you will protect, you will monitor, and you audit access to your critical assets, while you're ensuring that your employees and your business partners are productive. Because if you listen to what we've been saying, we just want people to be able to work effectively and efficiently, but with security controls in place. And so the Azure Identity Governance helps us to achieve this. One of the ways you can do this is to implement access reviews. Don't start big. Don't just go and say, I want to. You can pilot it. You can say you want to, do access review for a small group of users. Maybe you want to do access review for IT as a group, right? So you break it down. So what do? You say, what resources do I want to review? Who will review it? Then you now test the access. You now adjust your test again. So it's always encouraging, or rather, we always encourage people to always start access review with a small group of people, and then also to target non-critical resources, so that once you have done this over and over again, it can now help you to build the process and the procedures, or rather have a run book that you use to do your access review. But trust me, access review is something that is coming up every day at C-level conversations. They're always asking us, how do we ensure that our users are not using access that they don't need, or are not keeping access that they don't need? It's a conversation that we face every day. So when you're doing access review, this kind of
Sorry,
table.
Sorry, please could you go over the last slide again?
Okay, so this is more like a guide on how you should implement access review for pilot set of users, right? When we say pilot, I'm sure you understand. If you want to implement something, when you take a group of people, they are called the pilots. They are called the first set of people before you now distribute it across to everybody in the organization. So that's the word. That's where that terminology pilot comes into. So we're saying if you want to implement access review, pilot it first. How do you break down the pilot implementation? You say, what resources do I want to review? So in this instance, I'm saying I want to review IT resources. Who will review it? Is it the auditors or is it we in IT, maybe identity team? Who will test the access? And then once we have done that, we will now adjust the test and try it again to see that, okay, we did it the first time, this is what we got. Let us do it again. So this is just calling out a high level breakdown of how to do access review. Exactly.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Welcome. So tables like this are very important, when you want to do segregation of duties, when you want to map out users and groups, tables like this are group. It's always say resource type, who am I? Here we're saying group, application, AD role, AD resources, asset package, whatever is that thing that I want to review. Do I want to review a group? Do I want to review an application? That's the resource type. Or do I want to review Azure AD roles? Or do I want to review Azure resources? So in Azure resources, it could be I want to view mobile application resource group. That becomes my resource type. Or I want to review privilege roles, or I want to review access packages. Your resource type can be anything. And then you can now say who will manage this access review. Will it be the people in user administrator? Will it be people in identity and governance administrator? Will it be auditors? Whoever, you have to define who would be able to do the access review, and who would also be able to, after the access has been reviewed, read what the review output is. And these are the kind of things you do for C-level people that they like, right? Your CTO, your CIO, your MD, they are busy, but they would like to see some report that says, after an access review quarterly, quarter report that says, oh, we reviewed 10,000 users. We found out that 2,000 users are idle, haven't logged in 90 days. Out of those 2,000, 40 of them had administrator rights and have been retrieved. 2,000. When you give those kind of summary reports, your management feels like you are working, versus every day you're creating user, adding user in group, removing user. You're busy, but there are certain kind of high level things you do that cascade even to your CISO. Your CISO, they appreciate the whole work that you are doing in the identity space. Again, like I said, access review policy is what drives the implementation of access review. So your access review policy should be clear on what resources should we review, whose access should be reviewed, how often should we do this review, who will perform the review, how will people be notified that it's time for them to review, what are the timelines we want to use to enforce review, are there automated actions that we can take, right, based on what we see from the review, right? What happens if a reviewer does not respond in time? What manual actions also can we take based on the results that we see? So we have automatic actions we want to take. Maybe when we see, if we see an external user that has not logged in after 90 days, do we have to wait for it to go to the manager who requested for that account we created to approve? Or do we action, if you see external users with inactive activity greater than or equal to 90 days, action disable? It helps you. So you don't have to do 2 times. So you can action disable, then export the report. So what you are doing is, by the time the person who is reviewing that report, the person is seeing that, already everybody who is an external user with inactive activity greater than or equal to 90 days has already been disabled, so they can't even access our platform. This output we're giving you is your review. Should we still keep them or should we go ahead and delete? I've worked in an organization where the policy says that once a staff has resigned, right, the staff account should be disabled. And that's the normal thing to do, right? However, the policy, there had to be a sub policy to how long do we now keep that account in a disabled state? Because that account has been disabled doesn't necessarily also mean that that's not a point of entry, because somebody could compromise and go and enable that account, and because we thought that that person has left the organization, nobody is paying attention to login signals from that account will now go ahead and do XYZ. So keeping disabled accounts in the system longer than necessary is also not a right security practice. So we now had a sub policy that says that if the person is from and what we call management trainee up until assistant manager, delete after 30 days. And if the person is from deputy manager up onto MD, delete after 90 days. Why have we done that? Because we just felt that, okay, at the level of deputy manager to MD, your mailbox is very critical to us. So we're believing that within 90 days, we should have done, all the backup export that needs to run. We're looking at the job that you are doing from a management trainee to this within 90 days. We should have, it's now that's why I said policy is what drives access review. You as the identity person cannot be the one who determines how long you should review. No, it is the policy that says it, you implement. So people who are policy makers are the ones who will sit down and create this policy, because they will put business justification behind why they have taken those decisions. You will now implement what the policy says. The same happens for applications. You also should plan access review for application, right? Who has access, for employees, for external, what kind of data they can see. The same way, you want to review your access package, you want to review your groups, you want to review the Azure AD roles, you want to review the Azure resources. This is how you plan access reviews for applications. This is one part that IT people don't like to do. IT people, once we have gingered them the way I'm gingering you now, they just go in and they just do. And that's why them and business are always clashing. In communication is very important in anything you do, because you must carry people along. So it's very important that you understand how to communicate to the business and to the users what you're trying to do, right? So if it is compliance, if it is audit, just make sure that you have a proper communication plan and strategy. In some organizations, they could jazz it up. They'll go to their communication team who will jazz up the email and make it, very interesting so that people can read. Especially when you're doing things like cybersecurity awareness, you see some of those emails, they are catchy, so you want to read it, versus saying, let people not know now. All we know, we have done our campaign. So here's just talking about making sure you plan your communications. Don't just go ahead and do access review, remove people's rights. Make sure you communicate to them who needs to approve what, who is going to get what message at what time, so that everybody is in agreement. Here's just talking about the actual implementation. Now, where do you go to see access review? It is under identity governance, right? Under identity governance. Remember, identity governance, we will see entitlement management, which we have looked at. Now we will see access review. And on access review, you can now create the different types of access review. You also put who is the reviewer, who needs to. So after you've done access review, somebody needs to review the output of that access review, right? And you can, like I said, you can make it manual, you can make it automated. Do we have any questions so far? Proof this is talking about. I've spoken to all of this. What do you do? What are the management tasks that you do? I talked about how in an organization we categorize the user. So here saying you can decide that if the person is inactive, remove immediately. In that organization, the reason why we didn't want to delete mailboxes, we wanted to make sure the people in this data backup and recovery, they have enough time to back up that user's profile, just in the event maybe they had an incident or something, they don't come back. Because we've seen instances, so in the bank, the bank has a policy that you have to keep 10 years record, right? So there's the CBN policy that you'll have to keep a minimum of 10, I think you have to keep a minimum of 10 years record. So even though you're going to disable that user, even though you're going to delete that user that data has to be there for at least 10 years. So when we delete, the mailbox actually is active. So in the instance where there's an investigation, or maybe a customer comes back and is making a claims, or there's a lawsuit against, we always go back to the backup and then recover that person's mailbox. And then we can now read that mailbox and then look for XYZ evidence that the company needs, right? But from a user perspective and as an identity perspective, that account we no more exists. So because we know that there is a need for that data to be stored, that's why the policymakers chose those different criteria. So anybody can choose anything. But what this is saying is that your access review can allow you to implement certain management tasks here, where you can automate what you do the moment you have finished a review. So that way too, you're not doing manual processes. Again, you can also now make your access again, is the policy. The policy says there should be access review every quarter. So for companies that align with ISO 27001, I think there are things around ISO 27001 that speak to access review. And ISO 27001, we want to see where your auditors after a review. So I think for PCI DSS, you must do vulnerability scan, I think every quarter. So those kind of things where there's a compliance policy that forces you. The same thing with access review. I know ISO 27001 has something like that talks about access reviews. So those kind of things, you don't have to manually, you can now configure the access review to run every quarter. So all it to do is the access reviewer, the access implementer, it will just send them notification that you have an access review coming up XYZ time. So you can set this to be reoccurring. That's what Microsoft is saying, to make your life much easier. Any questions so far? Now we're going to quickly look at plan and implement privilege access. What is a privilege identity management? We call it PIM. Anytime you hear the slogan PIM, is privilege identity management. This is what enables you to manage, control, monitor access to resources in your organization. Again, what are resources? The Azure AD itself is a resource. Microsoft Online Services is a resource. Microsoft Intune, Microsoft 365. So once you have given somebody a privilege identity management, the person has superpowers. So when you see those cartoons that talk about, IT people have superpowers, yes, the superpower here is that if you give me a privilege identity management function, I automatically have superpowers to control everything. I can even delete your tenant. Yes, somebody with certain levels can delete a whole tenant and the organization is gone forever. So PIM allows you to do things like provide just-in-time access. If you recall again, for those who attended the different class, we talked about the zero trust methodology that drives identity, that says least privilege, least privilege, remind me, assume breach, and I can't remember the other one. So when we come to least privilege, you see most people complain, say, no, I said I need to be able to, that thing that person wants to do, the person only does it for, like I said, only quarterly. But the person wants you to give them the full rights to be able to do that. Meanwhile, that tax They do it only quarterly. They will never be able to do that. I'll give you an instance. Again, in the banking industry, the people who action the payment of salary, it's not necessarily IT. When payroll, depending on the banks anyway, when payroll has reviewed payroll and has gone to control and control has approved that payroll, it goes to, I don't know if it's company secretary or who, there's somebody or an ED who needs to now, they now do the bulk upload into the core banking. I think an ED or who needs to now initiate the button to say pay. The same thing for people like executive directors. They are sending people that their salaries is not. So the person who is doing payroll in HR most time, it's not the person that is doing the payroll for EDs and MDs, especially their benefits. Organizations have those kind of level of segregation of duty because you have to mature. Imagine someone who has never worked in her life, and her first job, she's working in the bank, and you give her payroll to manage EDs and MD salary. That person can have high blood pressure. We have done this job to see that psychologically the person can have, when the person see the kind of money that they are earning, that person can hit depression. So there are certain roles that you do. You don't jobs that you get, you don't just mature into those roles. I just wanted to be humorous there, but it happens. The same thing with IT. Somebody who doesn't have work experience came in maybe through management training school. Then you put the person in DB team, and you automatically give the person access to Finacle database, where the person is seeing customer accounts. It takes the grace of God for that person to not start thinking about how to steal. So in those kind of instances, you allow the person to have access to maybe application databases, and then the person will be overseeing the person that is doing the Finacle core banking end of day until the person matures. So there are certain things we don't just give people access. Now, let us take it that in the instance that, because we know that anything can happen, one person now gets sick. So I've been understudying Franca. She's the one in charge of core banking. And then for some reason, Franca just is indisposed and cannot action end of day. And then they say, okay, Joy, say, yes, I've been learning what she's doing. I can do it. Remember, I don't have that access right. So what can they do? They can give me a just-in-time privilege, that's what it's called, just to do that end of day for that day. And because everybody now knows that it's just that it's doing end of day, everybody is alert. Security control is alert. IT CIO is alert. Your manager is alert. Not even necessarily because they are suspecting you doing anything, just so that you don't make any mistake, because it's not your normal job. Versus if you already had that access rights. Meanwhile, you're not the one that does that thing all the time, and you haven't yet matured into that role. The same thing with consultants. When consultants come, you say, we are doing a project. These consultants are going to be the ones that will implement the application. Please give them full administrator right on the server. And you, the staff that's supposed to work with them, when consultant is working, you have stood up to go and take a smoke. You stood up to go for lunch. You don't know what your consultant is doing. I've investigated a fraud that happened 4 years after the implementation of that project. The consultants, one of them was compromised and put the back door 4 years ago. They only took advantage of that platform 4 years after. But the day they put the back door on that server was the first day the application was installed. That's how a hacker works. He's not in a hurry. He wants to take you unawares. 4 years after. So even people that were even in the team when the project was implemented have even left the organization. It was now new people in the team that were facing panel. But when we did our investigation, that NCAT was put on that server 4 years ago, and 4 years ago, the date was the exact date that application was installed on that box. So when you have consultants come to do things and people are in a hurry, you say, these consultants, I've been in organization, they give us PIN. When we come in the morning, we go to and we make the request on Azure AD saying, I need access for 6 hours. It goes, we get the approval, and then we're giving access for 6 hours. Because within that 6 hours, the system is up. We're not giving access after work hours. If you remember the Uber hack, when I read about one of the Uber hack, it was a consultant's access that was compromised. The consultant's access, they did MFA flooding on the consultant's account. And because he was He's a consultant. He has done his work. He's tired. He's seen his phone prompt with MFA. He gets a call. Oh, I'm the IT team. We're doing something. There's an MFA. Please, can you approve? He just approved it and went back doing with his normal life. Who knows where he was? And then the hackers got in and continued what they needed to do. So you will see organizations say, you know what? After work hours, consultants should not have access. It will go into a disabled state, or they should only, whenever they come every day, they should request for just-in-time access to do what they need to do, so that as soon as the thing is going, automatically it takes away all the privilege. So this is what PIM helps you to do. You can see just-in-time, time-bound access, can have a start and end. It can now also put approval. Okay, so maybe I'm a consultant, I'm doing, and then I'm just configuring. But the moment I want to install, I say, I need administrator privilege. I go to PIM, request for administrator, say, I want to run an installation for 1-2 hours. It will go to the owner of the application that I'm working with. And once they approve it, I'll be able to do what I need to do. PIM allows you to be able to use justifications to give people access. So everybody should not just be an administrator. No problem. You say you used to do administrator work, no problem. Anytime you need that administrator access, go and request for PIM and we'll give you. You will find out that 3 out of 6 times they don't come for it because they don't really need it, but they just want you to give it to them. Sometimes people feel privilege is an entitlement when it comes to technology. So it is important to identify all the stakeholders who are involved in a project and need sign-off review or stay informed. When you start using PIM as part of your planning process, right? You want to identify stakeholders, then you want to say, we want to start using PIM. Then you want to enforce principle of least privilege, remember? And then you want to decide which roles to protect with PIM. Of course, it's not all certain roles. You might maybe reviewer role. Somebody who has a reviewer role might be like, we don't need to put it inside PIM. But somebody who needs to maybe make changes, you say, no, before you go and change database record, before you go and change application location, right? And then once you have drafted this, your PIM settings, you now implement it. PIM allows us to, enforce the principle of least privilege, which, if you remember, when we were talking about the zero trust methodology that drives identity, least privilege is there. So if imagine an example where you have a developer, right, who needs to have the ability to access and change code. So I'm a developer. I'm developing an application for the financial team, probably that will help them do reconciliation, that will help them do this. All I need to do is to be able to change my code, not see XYZ banking transaction. Meanwhile, I'm a financial analyst who needs to test what the developer is doing. So I need to be able to use the application, but I don't need to be able to change the code. You can use just-in-time access to do this. So when the developer needs to change code, he will request. When the financial person needs to, they will request. You don't just give all of them access fully to code and to the application just because they say they are working on the project. So in PIM, you can assign eligibility for membership or ownership of privileged access group. Again, we can do the PIM from a group perspective. Like I said, if you're a consultant, you know that, okay, this consultant, there are 4 of them, right? You can create a group for that project and put those consultants in. So once anybody's in that group, the person will automatically be able to make a request for PIM. Here says you can assign Azure Active Directory built-in rules. But remember what I told you, that from experience and best practice, don't use built-in rules. What you do is customize the roles, duplicate the role if it gives you the opportunity to duplicate. If it doesn't give you, open the role, see what Microsoft has assigned. Now create your own custom role so that your roles are specific to functions, to departments, to group. Not that you're just using one built-in role and assigning to everybody. Try as much as possible to stay away from using, you can clone built-in rules, then call it, rename it, or duplicate or replicate, but don't just assign directly, because it's one role that you'll be assigned to different use cases, and that can create a backdoor. Again, this talks about how to implement step-by-step guide, which you will see in your lab. So people that have the Azure AD PIM function, they are the ones also that can help manage the built-in Azure roles like owner, user access, contributor, security admin, security manager. Again, it's the same thing I'm saying. Always, you see these roles, I like to customize it. I like to always customize it. So what I say to people is, for instance, because security admin can be different. I can be security admin in charge of antivirus, endpoint detection response, but I'm not in charge of the vulnerability assessment tool. Are you getting it? So if every time people say this person is a security admin and I just give the person security admin function, I can have 50 people with security admin function, but I want to be able to know out of those 50 people, 10 are for the antivirus team, 5 are for the vulnerability, 3 are for the, I don't know if it helps in your reporting. So for me, I like to, it's my own, it's how I have been able, over the years, seen it has helped, especially in investigation, in access and role assignment. So you see how to do this in your lab when you're going through your lab. One of the good things that Microsoft does is after giving you all this power, they do a lot around auditing and reporting, which is very important, you know. In my 10 years in career in banking, you know, one of the jobs I enjoyed was always doing forensic and investigation, because it would interest you to see how much people try to disguise themselves. Even when it was not an external hack, we had internal, you know, frauds and internal, it was roles like this, or from, sorry, tools like this that allowed us to be able to see certain usage and be able to track and get result and find out, you know, how staffs were able to manipulate the system. So the PIM helps you to be able to see who has done what, you know, and the good thing is you can export these reports, you know, and do further analysis, so that, you know, because sometimes doing this analysis from the system, so you can see the ability that you can export them, right, and then use them to, you know, do further analysis. It also helps you to have insight into what kind of privileges that you have been giving people, and over time you can know if people are misusing those privilege. How many of you have heard the word break glass?
I haven't.
Pardon? Did you say you have or you haven't?
No, I haven't. I have not.
Okay. So when you're implementing solutions, you must always ask yourself, after putting all this control, what if everything breaks or something breaks? How do I still get into the environment? Right? So we have what we call break glass accounts. Accounts that we say in the event where, you know, everything has gone bad, or in the event where you, who is putting the control, you are the one that has gotten compromised. There's that possibility, right? Or you have locked yourself out. We've seen cases where administrators are trying to, in the early days of my career, I've done something like that. You know, I was implementing a file integrity monitoring solution, which was a requirement for PCI DSS. We were getting ready. And one of PCI DSS is that you should be able to monitor the change of files, right? And so I had to implement it on the Active Directory. However, in my method of procedure, what I had written that I had taken to change was, when I configure the server to the theme and I point the Active Directory, because the NT, I can't remember See, the NTDM file is where people's passwords are stored on Azure Active Directory. So you want to control who has access to that folder. So in my method of procedure, I've said that when I point it there, I will select audit, not not block, because I wanted to first of all audit to be throwing the alert into the SIM, so that way we first of all even can see what is happening. I got distracted and I selected block. And while I was in the Active Directory working, people just started saying, I can't log in, I can't log in, I can't log in, papa. So I just said, let me, because I'm the AD administrator, so people were coming, and it was almost close to work fast, and people have gone. And then even the firewall people said, I can't log in, I can't. So you're trying to say, okay, let me log back into the AD to see why they can't log in. I got locked out because remember, I'm also trying to log into the AD that I have locked. So in those kind of situations, the only way you can get back into the system is using what we call a break glass account. So in projects, when we do projects, it's always also very important. Okay, someone like you, TT2, when you're implementing things like CCTV, after putting all the controls, telling them, oh, this is what you do, you need to create a process called break glass. What happens if XYZ happens? If the NVR gets crashed, or if XYZ happens, where are the footages? How would they recover existing footages? What you have to look at business continuity, and break glass accounts are part of business continuity. So like I've mentioned, an organization might need to use an emergency access account in some scenarios. One is, user accounts are federated and federation is not available. Either because, a network has broken, or your identity provider has gone down. So users are not able to sign in or redirect to the identity provider. An administrator that you have registered with AD authentication has forgotten their device at home and the service is not available. Different scenarios. I just gave you my own scenario, how I locked everybody out, including myself, from the Active Directory. So in that instance, break glass is what you will use to go into that environment. So when we do things like break glass, we don't put things like MFA on break glass, because remember, it could be the MFA service that has gone down, which is why you want to go in to maybe remove MFA temporarily from everybody so that people can work and then onto the MFA service. So when we're doing break glass, it's a very sensitive thing, because that break glass account itself doesn't have to get compromised, because what you have done with break glass is that you have reduced control policies on that account, because that's the account you use in the event of a scenario. So there's another conversation around how you protect your break glass account, but it's very important that you always have a break glass account. And that's why you see most times in the process, when we are building break glass accounts, the password of break glass, we always do what we call password share. So what is password share? When we want to create the password of a break glass, we can say, okay, Joy and Titi, you are the one that will need to use a break glass. So Joy will come and put, if the password is going to be 16 characters, I put the first 8, and I don't tell Titi what it is, and Titi puts the last 8. So that's what we call password share. So what has happened is we've created a password that unless me and Titi are there, that password can't function. So Titi only knows half of the password. Joy only knows half of the password. So if you watch some of all these American movies, you will see where there's a place that they say the American president goes, like the under chamber, and there's something, I can't remember what the Americans call it. You will see that there are different people that have different codes, and not everybody puts their code before that vault to open. I'm trying to remember some of the American movies that have showcased that that's what they do now. So when the terrorists come, if you notice, they always go and target in those movies all those people, because without those complete sets, they can't get into that vault. Yes, Titi, your question.
Is that dual control?
Absolutely, you can call that. Yes, you can put it as dual. You can also classify it as dual control. So I will never tell Titi my own end. Titi will never tell me her end. Okay. So doing a break glass in those kind of situations, that's another. So that's the way you protect a break glass password. So that way the password cannot be, and of course the password is not going to be like password 1, 2, 3, because remember, I don't know what Titi put. Titi does not know what I put. So most times you find out that those passwords are actually very complex, because I would put 8 of what I can know. She will put 8. That's in the event where we agreed in the policy that it has to be a 16 character password, of course, with special characters and all of that. So it's another way that you build security around break glass. So back to why we use break glass. So one of the things you want to do is you want to notify, account check. You want to train your security officers who might need this emergency, right, during break glass. And then you also need to even validate your break glass. I'm currently on a project where, in fact, yesterday I finished the break glass document. People criticized it, brought their reactions, and I'm going to update it. And sometime next week, we will simulate it for a privileged access management, just like the way you have PIM, but it's for an on-prem situation. And we're going to simulate that everything has crashed. And what do we do in that situation? So step by step of what everybody needs to do, in that situation. So you want to, develop break glass, like I told you guys that, yes, the training is ending today, but once we finish our project, I'm happy to handhold us up until the end of the year for us to learn and grow this career. So one of the things we can also achieve here is, I can say, go and develop a break glass run book for your Microsoft Azure tenant, right? That can be one of the tasks we'll do, and everybody will go and sit down and think, if I'm the global administrator of my tenant, if I cannot log in anymore, what do we do? So that moment, what I'm expecting you to just think around, okay, there will be an account, how do I secure the account? So I gave you an example. You create dual control of separation of, you don't just break down the process of how you want to do a break glass, and these are the kind of things that we can publish on your portfolio and put on LinkedIn. And when a prospective recruiter is seeing you and see that you've done things like this, it's a potential way to bring you into the organization, because they're like, you understand the concept of how these things are done. You don't even necessarily have to have done it. So in break glass accounts, yes, we do things, we verify, for instance, you can come and say, oh, Titi Joy, it's time to us to verify that password that people put, people can even still remember it or still functioning, until they just come and we simulate where they log in and they put it and everybody is fine. Or we can say, after every quarter, we need them to change the break glass passwords, just so that, we're also sure that it has not been compromised, or in the event where maybe Titi's role has changed or my role has changed, we can now come again and change the password, and another person will have another set. Because remember, only Titi knows it. So if you've changed her department, she's going with half of our password with her. And we can't guarantee anymore that she's going to be, committed to storing that password without sharing it. So in that instance, you want to, revalidate that everybody's still a member of the team and still holding that role that they hold. So let's look at how we analyze and investigate sign-in logins to troubleshoot access issues. I won't go into too much here, but some of the key things that happens when you're logging in is, you see your sign-ins, you get audit logs, and you get provision logs. So these are places where you can, use to investigate and analyze sign-ins, audit logs, provision logs. The good thing is that most organizations will already be injecting this into the SOC. But in the event where there's small organizations where they don't inject, these are places where the identity person can spend time. And this is how it also helps to improve on your company's process. When you pay attention to reading these logs, you can see behaviors. You can also see risky sign-ins, users that have been flagged for risk, leaked credentials. All of these things will show up in this place, and then it helps you to improve and define these policies that you have. So even for people in audit who are creating these policies, these are ways that they can use to say, oh, we've noticed a recurring behavior in our environment, because we're looking at the audit logs, looking at the sign-in logs. It's like our users spend more time doing XYZ, and then they can help define or refine these policies. So you see this around your sign-in reports under monitoring. Again, these reports can be downloaded, as much as telling you status, IP address, location, where the person went to, the username, the application. Is as detailed as this. And once you export this, it helps people that are in analytics to be able to do a bit of analysis. And the good thing about this is for people like Franca who are in Power BI. So if management is asking for certain dashboards, people like her who deal with tables. This is the kind of things that they'll be asking for. What are the tables that, the headers that we're going to use to allow them to create this dashboard, or fields that they will call in, so they can say, okay, when you're injecting, this is the data source, inject and export this into XYZ data source, and then they use these headers to now create the dashboards for management. And there are different file formats that we can use. Microsoft also keeps about 100,000 of these records. Again, you can export this to your SIEM or your log analytics, but on the Azure Active Directory, Microsoft will keep about 10,000 of these records. Now 10,000 is very small because it's 10,000 records. So signing activities is not 100,000. So you might be looking at 100,000 looks like a big number, but when it comes to activities and records, it really is a small number depending on how much is happening in that organization. Again, it keeps this information even for signing applications. Who is using an application? What are the top applications that are in use, right? So when you begin to do things like Microsoft Cloud Apps, where we use the Microsoft Defender to manage applications in environments, where we can see the type of applications people are using in our organization. The signing activity can tell you also how much time people are spending on XYZ application and the applications that are of top use in your organization. So an organization probably can see that a lot of people are using Grammarly, but the organization does not own Grammarly, right? It can help management to make an informed decision to say, why don't we go and buy Grammarly enterprise subscription, because we can see that it's helping our users to function better in their jobs, but we don't have a Grammarly enterprise subscription, but it's top used in our organization. These kind of things too can help you make those kind of informed decisions. So the audit log also, just like the security logs, will tell you, give you monitoring, tell you who is making, what changes, who is assessing what. That's what the audit logs will tell you. And you can filter your audit logs on any category. Microsoft too, because Microsoft owns the operating system, there's nothing you cannot get out from the device. So you can get any kind of service filter, category filter that can allow you know what has happened, who has changed. Again, just like the same way under monitoring, you see signing, the same way you can see audit logs. So how many users were changed? How many passwords were changed? What has the administrator done in that document? What are the groups that have been added? What are the groups that have been deleted? Who are the owners of this group? What licenses have you assigned to a user? You can see all of those audit activities that have been done on your tenant. Even for even applications, when we looked at published applications, you can see an application name be changed, has an application location be changed, who changed it. All of this can be seen in your audit logs. And then finally, just on a nutshell, log analytics is what helps you to analyze logs outside. So all of this is showing on your Azure Active Directory, but there's a limitation of the kind of analysis you can do. And most times, as the identity person, you're not necessarily the one. There are teams called, security analysis. There are people that their job is to sit down every day and analyze activities so that they can say we are on that part. So you can imagine in CIA, FBI, those kind of environments. You can imagine in CAD systems, CAD management systems, the kind of analysis that they need to do. Right. Even in some e-commerce environments, they use this to be able to know how many customers are coming to our platform, how many customers are logging in, how many customers, when they come to buy, when they click, they eventually are creating profiles, all of these kind of things. If you're leveraging on identity, Microsoft identity for those platforms, you can be able to get, or you are hosting your application, on the Azure environment, you can get this kind of analytics. So what log analytics does for you is helps you to do some deep dive, analysis. You can run queries that can help you to retrieve records, matching criteria, identify threats and patterns. You can say, oh, we're seeing lots of logging. I keep using this example in the class, lots of logging from Pakistan. And our business has nothing to do in Pakistan, but how come every XYZ time we see XYZ logging from Pakistan? Those patterns should be able to trigger us to be able to make certain security decisions. Okay. And then you can now configure alert systems. You can, based on what you have analyzed, say, okay, when I see this XYZ trigger, let XYZ people get notified. Let the SOC team be notified. So people who enjoy this part of the Azure solution are those who are in the SOC, the Security Operations Center. This is very useful for them. How many of you know what we call SIEM? SIEM. So in
Yes,
security,
and
yeah,
security and event,
yes,
security information and
exactly. So in security, organizations in the Security Operations Center are highly dependent on the SIEM solution, which is a security information event management solution and a security orchestration automated response. The security orchestration automated response was a new feature that was introduced over the years, to now help orchestrate, because it's not just by seeing the event. I want to make proactive decisions, right? So that's where the SOA came in. So there are different solutions. We have QRadar, we have Splunk, all of these are different things. But Microsoft's own solution now is called the Microsoft Sentinel. You can see how much information Microsoft is getting. So it only makes sense for Microsoft to have a SIEM solution. So Microsoft has what it calls the Microsoft Sentinel. And so some organizations to leverage on it to inject those logs into the SIEM. And then the SIEM is now able to do automated response for you. So Microsoft calls it the bird eye view, that helps you. And the good thing with Microsoft Sentinel is that as long as you are using Microsoft Azure, you automatically can inject any log from anywhere into the Sentinel. And then the Sentinel begins to show you its power. It has the ability to be able to look, into sophisticated attacks, look at the rate at which those attacks are replicating or behaviors and patterns in your organization, and help you make informed decision. So this is just talking about how you connect your Azure AD logs now into your log analytics. It doesn't just happen automatically. Remember, we've looked at the sign-in, risky sign-in, audit logs. Those ones are there automatically. But if you want your logs to go into Sentinel, it's not automatic, right? Because the Sentinel is another license feature. You would have to come to your Azure AD and use the data connectors and then connect it. However, it is possible and doable. Again, if an organization does not want to use the Microsoft Sentinel, they have their own third party, like I said, Splunk, QRadar. The good thing is the Microsoft Azure AD allows you to export, these logs that we saw. You can see how we saw powerful information. You can see user sign-ins. You can see which device, which country, which IP address, which location, which time, what and what happened. You can also inject this information into a third party, SIEM solution that allows the organization to be able to still see, what is happening on the Microsoft Azure AD. So that's the good thing. So an organization has their third party solution, but they're using Azure AD as the identity. You can still connect the two. And then this is where you look at how to analyze Azure AD, using things like the usage and insights. Again, after you have done all this, your implementation, you want to spend time on usage and insight. And the truth is, one person does. So you see all these things we've studied. In an ideal world, you can imagine the team. The team is going to be a large team, because it's not the person that is busy creating the access review that is doing the analysis and all of that. However, for small companies, you might find yourself struggling that you are just the only one. That's why it's good to know it, that you can leverage it. So for instance, if you're a company of just 20, 30 staffs, right? And these are the extra value you can bring to your organization. After you finish creating, you might find out that in 3, 4, 5 months, you never have to create users. So these are the ways you can use to optimize. Spend time under the usage and insights, and you begin to see what is happening in your organization. And you can use it to define improvement policies and security controls that you can recommend to your management. And that helps show value of what you are bringing to the organization. Again, the usage and insight tells you who is doing what, How many applications did they try to log in that even failed? What are the top type of errors that we see? And it gives you nice dashboards, trends that allow you to be able to. Before we go, let's just look at this last thing that talks about identity score. Microsoft introduced this identity score and it's so cool. I like it because even without doing anything, once you have the identity score, it tells you how secure your organization is. It already measures and tells you where your problem is. The identity score can tell you that your problem is that your users don't have MFA. Your identity score can tell you that the problem is that you have users that have MFA, but you are not enforcing it. So without even, first of all, even being the one struggling to say, oh, I just got into this company now and I don't even know where to start. They don't have policies there. Go and look at your identity score dashboard and it will tell you what the problem of that organization is. It could be that they are not disabling user accounts. It could be that people are using weak passwords. So there's no enforcement of password, complexity in that organization. So take advantage of the identity score dashboard. It helps you to show you what's happening in your organization, and you can now, put controls that allow you to implement this score. On that note, I want to say thank you very much. Once again, if you're watching this on YouTube, this was brought to you by Textilers Community. This is the cohort 4 and the security learning pathway. We've been studying Microsoft Identity and Access Management. This is our last class. Please feel free to go to the YouTube channel and look at all. We had 7 classes, sorry. So start from beginning, look through. Please feel free to join the community so that you can ask us questions. Next week, we would be having a class, but that will be strictly to review our project, which will have 1 week to implement. The project will be sent out to us hopefully before the end of Monday, so that we can start working on it. And then next week, we'll have a quick short class to just go through question and answer if there's any issue that you're having. And by the 27th, we would be reviewing, we will have to submit the project. And then there's no right or wrong. So this is not school exam, but the whole idea is that try and attempt it so that we can, review. So on the 27th, I will go through the project. So you will score yourself, on what you've done, see what you've done, and then we can guide you on how you can publish that your project on your profile and your portfolio. The next thing we'll be doing is that Microsoft is starting what they call the Microsoft Learn Challenge. I'm going to find out the date. I got the email sometime last week. And the Microsoft Learn Challenge allows you to be able to get free Microsoft certification. And if you remember, on day 1, we agreed that we are all going to study together to write the SC300 exam. So I'm going to find out when that Microsoft Learn Challenge kicks off so that we can all register and go through Microsoft's own tutor that will take us through what we've done just as a refresher course, and then we can all prepare to write the SC300 before the end of the year. Thank you very much, and have a great day. Except you have questions, please.